listeners. Welcome to Focus on EDU. My name is Bryan Krause, and I am the Educational Strategist for the West. And I'm super excited to be here today. I wanted to thank Doug Konopelko, who is the Senior Impact Manager for CDW, for allowing us to have this time today and for me to sit on the mic as a substitute, maybe a poor substitute, but I'm very excited about today's guest. Today's guest is Jon Widmier, and Jon Widmier is the Prevention Coordinator for Littleton Public Schools, where he has helped coordinate mental health efforts, specifically in the areas of suicide prevention, school safety, and multi-tiered systems of support. In addition, Jon is a teacher of counselors at Denver Seminary here in Colorado. And we are very blessed to have somebody of Jon's caliber who's an expert in social emotional learning. And we're very excited to have him today. So I'd like to welcome Jon. Jon is a good friend of mine, and I'm super excited to hear from him today. And I think he'll be able to provide a lot of insight into kids today as what they face. So Jon, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your background in education, and something fun about yourself.
Thank you, Bryan. It's a pleasure to be on. This is my 12th year as an educator. This is my 5th year working here in Littleton Schools. I started off in a different district here in Colorado, and I found someone at the district level who was maybe foolish enough to take a chance on me at that other district, and that kind of launched me into my career. I'm a school counselor by trade. I didn't spend a ton of my career working in a school building. I was able to kind of launch into a bit of an unconventional and different path out of where I became an administrator early. Started doing a lot of crisis work, started doing a lot of counseling of counselors, if you will, or just helping out kind of more behind the scenes, and got really excited about the idea of, rather than being able to help the 350 or 400 kids that would have been on my caseload, got to be a part of decisions that affected 85,000 kids in my previous district and 10,000 kids here in Littleton Schools. And so have really enjoyed some of the systems work, but still have some opportunities to get down on the base level and work with kids in crisis, as that unfortunately seems to be taking place more and more. Right. I also teach at Denver Seminary as school counselors, which kind of fits into my purpose of why I'm in education, which is to serve, grow, and inspire educators just to be the best people that they can be. I think there's just a big need for encouragement at all levels, both as parents and as educators in this world right now. And so I'm just trying to help people out with that. Something that people don't know about me would be that I grew up working for my father in an archery shop. And so really learned at an early age. I think some child labor laws were violated, Bryan, in my youth, because I was working as soon as I could basically stand. But it was interesting, working retail, selling bows and arrows to people, learned at an early age kind of how to read people, or kind of what good sales strategies looked like as far as just talking to people and listening. And as much as I'd like to say my education was important, I think the majority of life lessons that I've learned were early on working for my father, and just the value of hard work and being good to people and trying to do the right thing always is how you earn customers, but it's also kind of how you get through life, how you earn trust, how you earn equity in schools, as you work with educators, as you work with parents, and certainly as you work with students as well.
Nice. Well, thank you, Jon. So as we talk about promoting social and emotional security, let's jump in right now. How do we promote social and emotional security post-pandemic, in your viewpoint as an administrator and also teacher of counselors? Yeah,
that's a great question, and I think one that us as a school district, as a state, maybe even as the world, we're looking at and trying to figure out how do we best we best do that right now? And really, how do we best take care of our kids? How do we best parent? How do we best go through life right now? Because the world changed pretty dramatically in the last 5 years. And I think really understand how we promote social emotional security in our schools. I think it kind of starts with, we have to take a pretty honest evaluation of where we're at right now as a world, as a society. And it's pretty interesting when you look at it. There's a lot of paradoxes right now in the world. And by paradoxes, I mean, if you look at social media and the internet, and just, I don't think there's ever been a time in the world where we're more connected and we're able to talk to people across the world in seconds. And at the same time, we've probably never been more isolated. People go into their homes, they pull in at the end of the day, they put their garage doors down, and that's it. They don't come out again, or they don't go and talk to their neighbors. A lot of times when I have the opportunity to talk to parents or to adults, one of the things that you can challenge people with is, do you even know your neighbors' names? We've kind of lost sort of our sense of community. And yet we have 500 friends on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, and our kids are going through the same thing. They've never been more connected. They've never been more isolated. Our kids are bombarded with information at a faster pace than what's ever been seen before in humanity. The barrage of news and media outlets that hits your phone is nonstop, 24 hours a day. The 24-hour news cycle is real. And yet I find our kids are starving for wisdom. So we've never had more knowledge, and yet we're still starving for wisdom. Students have never been statistically more physically safe, and yet the intensity of their emotions, of what they're dealing with, the suicide rate is at the highest levels of all time across the United States. The Surgeon General's declared a mental health crisis. And so the best way I know how to describe this, when I was a kid, and it might have been the same for you, Bryan, but when I was a kid, my parents used to kick us out of the house and say, go get some fresh air and don't come home until the street lights come on. And then we would eat dinner together. And now families are scheduled at such a fast pace. They don't eat dinner together, but when the kids go out to play, they have to be supervised in their front yard because we're worried about what's gonna happen to them. So it's just a very different world that we lived in, and I think we're all trying to adapt and do the best that we can. And at the same time, it seems like there's more strife, more political polarization, more people just being at odds, and you see fights on airplanes or fights at traffic stops. And so it's a really intense world right now. And what we've noticed in our district is people aren't necessarily melting down at higher numbers than what they did prior to the pandemic. But what we're seeing is there's an intensity to the emotions that people have right now that is much higher than it was for the pandemic. And so to answer your question in the long way, and I apologize for being so long-winded, to answer that question, I think we have to realize that schools, the days and the times of us being able to get together and say, we're just about education, we're just about the ABCs, those days we have to give more. We have to contribute. We have to do our part, which is helping kids, helping parents really deal with a lot of the emotions that they're feeling right now, and try to be more supportive in what we can do to try to give kids skill sets that they can use to kind of deal with what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah. And I know you're a parent of 2 young ladies. What do you teach them when it comes to feeling socially and emotionally safe?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have 2 daughters. One is 12, one is 10. If you would have asked me 12 years ago what it takes to be a parent, it would have been a lot easier answer, because I had all the answers. All you had to do is just ask me, Bryan. But now that I've become a parent, it's much, much harder. And I find myself sitting with parents and just being empathetic and just talking about how this is really difficult. This is really hard. And but the things that we really try to teach with our parents is my wife and I try to parent with relationships in mind, meaning our goal is for our daughters to be kind, to be good people. And we want them to be thoughtful about others, to think about others' relationships. So if the other day, for instance, one of my daughters at soccer practice was goofing around a little bit much, and her coach called her out on it after practice, and so we had her apologize to her coach, not because she was in the wrong, which she was, but more because she needed to repair that relationship with her coach. So we always try to parent with relationships in mind. We want them to always be thoughtful about relationships. We want them to grow up to be, we want them to be good kids, but our long-term goal is we want them to be good adults. And even more so than that, we want them to be good adults who see the value and want to be around our family. And we want to be around each other. So we want to raise people that we want to hang around with to some degree.
Yeah.
I joke around with my wife. I say, what do you think the girls are going to grow up and resent us for when they're in their 30s? Every now and again, just to kind of melt our brains a little bit. And we have no idea. But I'm sure there will be something, because I mean, we're human beings and we fall short in so many different ways. But it's we're just trying to raise them to be good people as best that we can.
Yeah. Well,
so that's kind of our goal.
Well, I appreciate your values and how you raise your kids. And I think that really carries into your work too. I think since you become a parent, I think you're probably more empathetic and understand what parents are going through. And I think what they need too. And so I wanted to tell you, I appreciate the work that you do around that. So as we move forward here, what do you think has been the biggest impact? You talked a little bit about it, social media, that sort of thing. What else has been an impact on students and school community mental health?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, to kind of take the long way to get to that answer, our district, like many others across the United States, we've actually studied this, which is kind of unusual, but just to give you some background, we have had in our district, we've struggled with youth suicide as a lot of people have across the United States. We've had some suicide clusters in our district, meaning we've lost multiple kids in a short amount of time. Some of those were related over the course of 3 years. We lost 5 students to suicide in one of our high schools. And so we actually reached out for extra support to try to say, what can we do better? What are we doing, or what can we do better as a school, as a district, as a community, or what might we be doing that could be contributing to this? So we actually worked with a researcher out of the University of Indiana, and she came out and studied our district to try to help us pinpoint promising practices or things that we can do better, and really try to take a look at it, if there was something more holistically we could look at. And it was a really insightful process that we looked at. The things that she really highlighted for us that were helpful was just the idea of trying to create cultures of belonging, trying to create cultures where kids can build relationships with adults, where kids feel like they can be accepted no matter who and what they are. And there's a lot of numbers and a lot of statistics out there that highlight specific groups of kids that might be more at risk for suicide. And so are there ways that we can just reach out to kids, or just be more culturally thoughtful about how we approach kids and how we go about building relationships? We've talked with a lot of our students. We have a student mental health advisory group in our district, and they've given us some advice on just what helps teachers connect with students. And it can be the littlest of things that can make a huge difference. They even talk about, on the first day of class, teachers a lot of times will have a slide that tells them a little bit about themselves and just how meaningful that is to students. Because if there's just one thing on that slide that they can relate to, then they feel like they might be able to go and talk to that teacher, at least about that subject, but maybe about something else. And so really it's trying to create the teacher-student relationships where it's not just all business, it's not just all academics all the time, but it's really that teachers get to know their students on by we say by name and need, and really kind of understand a little bit about who their students are. The other things that she helped us with were making sure that we took a whole child approach, or some of our schools take a real focused whole child approach, meaning it's not just an academic conversation, but it's really about the entirety of the student's needs, their emotional needs. And along those lines, we set up multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, around the social emotional aspect of kids' lives as well. So we have
Nice.
Student intervention teams, or we call them SIT teams, because in education we abbreviate everything. But SIT teams where we'll take almost like a clinical approach to like how do we look at their social emotional needs and what can we do differently? What kind of supports can we put in place for them? In our district, we're very fortunate as well. There's the Littleton Public Schools Foundation, which raises money for the district. And for about the last 5 or 6 years, they've made mental health one of their focuses. So they help raise money to help support students in their mental health. And the way we utilize that as a district is we have a mental health resource coordinator, and she's gone out and met with all the local therapists in the area, and has a huge spreadsheet and database of therapists and what modalities they use and what insurance they take. And so when a student has a need, we'll actually help find that therapist for them based off of that information and help make some connections to them to try to find a match. I joke around, she's like a matchmaker for therapists for our students and sometimes some of our adults, but mostly for our students to help make sure that they get the care. And she helps them navigate the process, because it can be tricky in healthcare accessing mental health resources. And so she's there to help them navigate that and help them make sure that they get the proper care that they need, but also that we follow through. So we actually, a lot of times in school districts, they'll dance around the idea of you might need therapy or you might want to look at it, and we'll say you need therapy. We'll help you find a good one. And in cases where they're uninsured or underinsured or can't afford it, we can use some of that foundation money to actually even help pay for some of the therapeutic resources as well.
Wow.
So it's been a real difference maker as far as how we reach out and help and work with kids as well.
What a great resource that is.
Yeah.
Well done. CDW is a technology company. How do you see technology playing into helping support students these days?
Yeah. It's interesting as you look at technology, and just really, I feel like we're on the cusp of a lot of big changes in technology. I'm maybe a late adopter, but I've been seeing some of the artificial intelligence plans that are out there, and you have to feel like there's something coming with that will help students. But the way we currently use technology, we have several different ways that we do it. We use an internet monitoring system. So we monitor our students' Google Suites. We have a part-time employee who gets all the alerts when anybody writes a word or a sentence or a phrase in English or non-English that can flag, and they go to a database, and that our part-time employee looks through those and then notifies the schools if we think there needs to be follow-up. That's been really beneficial for us. Certainly during the pandemic years when everyone went home and was doing remote learning, what we found was our internet monitoring system, all of those alerts went through the roof. We were getting a ton of those alerts, and that was really our only touch point with students, because we weren't seeing them in the hallways, we weren't seeing them in classrooms, and so that was how we identified students who had needs. But we use that still, even after the pandemic. The numbers have dropped significantly in that, but that's identified everything from drug use to suicidal behaviors to, I believe it's helped stop potential fights among students, because you can see them starting to escalate in an email exchange. Sometimes we have students who get their cell phones taken away, and so they'll start a chat in a Google document where they can type and read each other, and you can track the entire Google document and who says what. And that's been a really beneficial process, because we're within minutes able to identify that student. Just the other day, we had 2 students that were kind of insulting each other in extremely inappropriate ways in a classroom back and forth via email. And we forwarded the email exchange to the assistant principal, the mental health person. And the assistant principal said, I'm in that classroom right now. I'm going to go handle this. So it was kind of interesting. The students are also aware of this now. So sometimes we'll get some really colorful language saying, don't flag this. These are song lyrics, or this is a project. And so the students know that we're looking, but also I think that's beneficial because they know that there's people watching. And we've asked our students about this and said, how do you feel about us looking at this? And we thought there would be a lot of pushback, and we thought parents would push back on the invasion of, if this might be considered an invasion of privacy, but parents and students have all said, well, we see a lot of benefit to this. And if this helps one person, it's worth it. So that's one way. The other way we've used technology is in our student information system. We've been able to create all of our documentation into fillable forms and store those in our student information system. So we've taken all of our suicide interventions, all of our threat assessments, all of our child abuse reports. We put them in the student information system. When a administrator or mental health professional pulls them up, they automatically populate with all the student information. And then we're able to pull reports on all of those danger assessments, is what we call them, that are done. And then we're able to get demographic information on it based on gender, race, grade level, school, and really been able to compile and track some district data over the last few years since we've done that. And that's been a real game changer, both for the end users, because it just speeds up the process. They're able to fill out the documentation quickly because they're not spending a lot of time typing in students' names or phone numbers or parents' names and phone numbers. So they're able to put in the information of just what's most relevant and important to the situation. But it also allows us to create documentation that follows that student from school to school, from elementary through high school, of what's happened at what grade level, so we can kind of see their history with that as well, because we know we treat students that have multiple interventions a little bit differently, or maybe with a little bit more care to see what's going on, as opposed to if it's just their first one.
Nice. Well, and the most extreme example, I'm sure, is time is so important, especially if there's suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
And I really applaud you for being forward thinking in that. That's because it could save lives.
Absolutely. And you don't want mental health professionals bogged down with 45 minutes of paperwork to have to fill something out after you're doing an intervention. We want it to be quick, because sadly what we found is some of our mental health professionals have to do multiple assessments in a day. And so we want that to be as quick and as easy and as efficient as possible, because the most important thing is really taking care of the students, not filling out our documentation. But we feel like we found a nice compromise to where they're able to do both efficiently, and they can focus more on the student and their health in the heat of the moment.
Nice, well done. Let's say you're a teacher, and you don't feel well equipped to deal with mental health issues. What would you say? And I know that you've spoken to large groups of teachers, not only in the state of Colorado, but across the United States. What do you tell teachers around keeping kids safe and providing safety for them?
There's a lot of teachers, when we talk about mental health, teachers, and I respect this, teachers say, I don't want to talk about an area where I'm not an expert. I'm a content matter expert in math or science or social studies or language arts or whatever it may be. And they get a little leery talking about mental health, understandably so. It can be a touchy issue. But I think rather than saying you have to be an expert in mental health to talk about it, and as somebody who has a degree in a mental health field, I don't know that I'm any more qualified or any more of an expert than anybody else. I think the way I tell teachers to handle this is to start by just saying, like, I may not be an expert in this field, but I'm a human being. And as a human being, we're all on our own mental health journey. And so as an adult, I'm hopefully a little bit further along, or maybe I'm a few steps down the road from where the kids are. And so let me explain what works for me. And so I think the way that you can talk about it is, this is what helps me, or this is what I work on. The problem when we talk about mental health as a society, even sometimes, is we spend 80% of our time talking about what's wrong or what's wrong with me or what I went through or how horrible it was. And a lot of times we only spend 20% of that time talking about how we get through it. But I think if we flip that model, if we talk about, well, this is what happens to me, and you spend maybe 20% of the time talking about it, and you don't have to go into a lot of great detail, because kids, I think a good rule for oversharing when it comes to teachers, if you've shared so much that the kids feel like they now need to take care of you, you've probably overshared. And so it's, the idea isn't to overshare or tell them how terrible your life is, but it's to provide some empathy and just say, I've been through some stuff myself, but this is how I got through it, and spend 80% of the time talking about, this is how I cope with it, or this is how I dealt with this feeling, or this happened and it made me sad, but it also made me really angry, and this is what I found what helps me. And I think if we can get into that model of, as a human being, I deal with the same emotions, and emotions that you feel are normal. And these are the emotions that everybody can go through. And what you feel is okay. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel, but this is how we can help deal with it, because you can't be angry. Well, you can be angry, but it starts to play out, and you start to fulfill your own prophecy of, nobody likes me because of the way you treat other people. And so you have to be able to deal with your emotions, understand it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling, but then kind of lead them into, this is what helps me. Because I'll be honest with you, we meet with a lot of kids in my job, and a lot of kids are going through stuff that I can't even fathom what they're going through. They're dealing with heavy stuff. And so for them to just have somebody that they can talk to that lightens their load. And so to be that safe space, that trusted adult, but also just to say, hey, that sounds really hard, and when I'm struggling, I deal with this way, can really be helpful for them.
Nice. Well, I think, the resilience piece and teaching kids that is one of the greatest gifts we can give to kids.
And along those lines, Bryan, a lot of times the model is not resilience, but it's endurance. So a lot of times endurance, and you know this as someone who does marathons and incredibly long races and things like that. Like endurance, the way I would define that, or the example I use, is if you're running a long race and you get a blister on your foot, endurance is, how long can I gut this out? How long can I run with this pain? And I think sometimes that's the model that we use. That's the unsuccessful model that we use around dealing with our feelings, is that endurance model, where the idea is, if we can be resilient, which means maybe we stop running for just a minute, we put a Band-Aid on it, we fix whatever's going on with our sock or in our shoe, we put second skin on the blister, and then you can actually go further, faster, because you stopped and took care of it. That's that resilience model. And I think that's the idea of, it's not about endurance, it's about resilience. How do we help people get better? How do we walk them through and say, everybody struggles, this is just where you're at, but how do we help you get to a spot where you can be resilient and carry on? To say that we're all going to get through life without experiencing feelings or hard times or troubles is not realistic. It's just, how ready are we when we deal with that? Nobody gets out of this life unscathed. That is, I tell you, Jon, you have given us a lot of nuggets of wisdom, and I so appreciate your practitioner's viewpoint and somebody who's on the front lines every day. But if people want to learn more, what are some resources, maybe blogs, books, or people that you rely on heavily that our listeners could connect with or track down? Yeah, there's some great resources. And I kind of go through different phases. I just finished reading, Dr. Bruce Perry wrote a book with Oprah Winfrey, called What Happened to You, which is a phenomenal book about being trauma informed and really kind of understanding that everybody's going through something. Everybody's got something that they're dealing with in their life. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Lisa D'Amour. She has a podcast, Ask Dr. Lisa. And she also just came out with a new book called The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, which is phenomenal. I can't recommend her enough. Dr. Anna Muller's work, the person that she's the researcher we partnered with out of the University of Indiana, has a lot of fascinating research just around, well, more specifically around suicide prevention. I also like listening to the Social Work podcast with Dr. Jonathan Singer. Oh, I can't talk right now. He's a great resource and has a lot of great things. And then just from my own personal development, I really enjoy kind of anything by Adam Grant or Simon Sinek. They've got just a ton of resources more on the personal development side as well.
Nice.
But if somebody once told me if you're a leader, you're a reader, and that doesn't work for me. I'm more of a listener. So I tend to do books on tape or podcasts is where I find I have the most success looking at that stuff.
Well, thank you, John. And just know that anytime that we talk, it seems like John always gives me some podcast to listen to. So I appreciate your leadership, but most of all, I appreciate your care and for the kids that are entrusted to you. I thank you for your leadership of counselors and mental health professionals, and most of all for your integrity. I really appreciate who you are as a person, and I just thank you for this time today, and look forward to speaking with you again. That's it for our show. Thanks again to Jon Widmier and Doug Konopelko, and hope you enjoyed this session, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can be notified whenever we post new content. Looking forward to seeing you next time.